Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah.
Sorry. comments will be.
In other words, watch what we're saying.
Right.
So we can go ahead and start. Is everyone ready? You're on?
Yeah, we're all.
Okay, we'll call to order the planning commission meeting for Wednesday, January 10th, 2024. Roll call.
Chair Cindy Olson,
Here.
Chuck Howard,
Here.
Don Reimer,
Here.
Ursula Kuzulugui, here, Ken Slingmaker.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, approval of the agenda. First and a second, please.
Hello. Move to approve the agenda. I'll second.
All in favor? Yes. Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, approval of the minutes for December 6th, 2023. Can I get a motion for a first and a second?
I'll move to approve the minutes from December 6th, 2023.
Hey, I'll second it.
Okay, any questions or comments? Corrections?
I haven't got a correction, but I can find it. Okay.
I looked too, and I tried. It's just somebody else can always find your.
Right, that's why
Yes.
there's editing. to
Yeah.
get it, Yeah.
No, all good.
Okay, so all in favor say yes. Opposed, no. Okay, motion carries. Okay, any conflicts of interests on the agenda? No. Any non-agenda public comment items?
None in chambers.
Okay, we'll go with the staff update.
Well, let's see, I'm now at a month and a half of work, getting up to speed. I provided an update in your packet of just things that are being worked on, things you'd potentially be seeing over the next few months. I don't know if you'd like me to go into any of that in detail, or if you just want.
I think that's fine. I've read through it. Did everybody read through it?
Mhm.
Any questions for
Yes.
Dylan?
For the COA is used a couple times. What does that stand for?
Sure, so that is the certificate of appropriateness. It's required for buildings within the historic district. If there's any proposed exterior modification.
Right on. Thank you.
So that'll go to HPRC. Does it come to us then?
The COA would not come to you
Right.
for action.
Okay.
But if you'd like.
No. That's fine. Okay, pretty about it. Wasn't sure about it. Okay. Any other questions on the staff report?
I had a couple of questions on the annexations. Where is the 100 acres that CDOT right away?
It's essentially, not to get too specific, it's essentially, we have two portions from essentially like Hidden Valley area to a certain point in the city. And then we have a little bit annexed, and then it's from that point west, a little bit past city limits. So it's essentially just CDOT right of way, and it's for the purpose of basically the police department being able to come in and do enforcement as needed in those areas, because as it stands now, there's kind of strange jurisdictional issues without having all of the right of way and city limits annexed.
So it's part of the central bottom of this parkway, Central City Parkway.
It's west. It's more towards the west end.
But east of the tunnel.
Yeah, there's essentially two separate parcels to be annexed, one of which is like on the eastern portion of town, and one of which is farther west and going west of the city limits. And we talked to, the update on these also is I talked to the county today, and they want to see impact reports for both, so we're going to prepare those and send them their way, just because it's required by state statute if you're over 10 acres. So that's something else I'll be working on over the next couple of days.
Okay, second question is 839 Highway 103. Where is that?
So that is near the cemetery. It's owned by Al Brown is his name, and he's approached us to talk about annexing the parcel in, and it's we really haven't done anything with that yet, but it's probably coming in the next few months. Yeah. It's essentially just adjacent to the cemetery.
Okay, I was just curious because we said senior housing could be possible. This is the first time I've heard it.
Well, I don't know, John, if you have any more info on that.
I think just a little bit careful because it's a case that would come to you. But there's been some interest expressed in what property over there might be able to accommodate to help with some of our housing needs, especially for senior populations. It's not a project that's underway or anything like that, but there's some desire to maybe address some of that need. And that could be a property that could be a goal of this property owner in the future. So I think that's really kind of where it stands right now. It hasn't really been developed as an idea or anything like that. And for that, just I think that's one of the things he'd like to do is maybe have a legacy in that direction.
Okay.
Where's the annexation cut off there? The other side of the cemetery?
Yeah, I think that originally this property was annexed when Jared was here, I remember. I don't know, it must have been about a year, well, maybe a year and a half ago. And this property was surveyed and intended to be annexed at that time. There was some interest in that time. And then I'm not sure exactly why he didn't annex. So this is just kind of like a cleanup of that. He changed his mind.
So it's
basically.
extending the annexation,
Yeah,
it's
just a
not
little-
spotty.
No, it's contiguous. It's just to the west. If you think about where the little road goes up, or I guess to the south, it's just beyond that where there's like a little grade difference there on the end of the cemetery.
Can you see that?
Yeah, again, it's like,
Is it?
it's
Yeah.
basically this little space right here on the bottom corner. Not this house. It's actually just a little past it. So if you go, there's another road that kind of goes up this way and then it's right here. So it's basically just past the frame, I guess. But it's I want to say it's about a 1.5 acre site. So.
That's all for me.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, then we'll go to new business. And these are ordinances that were drafted that we give our approval on, and then they go to council for council's approval. So first one is the food truck ordinance. So if somebody wants to make a motion to approve or disapprove the ordinance to pass on to council.
I had a question. The discussion is good at this point.
Should we do the motion, then discussion?
Oh, yeah.
I'll make a motion to approve the.
You could have to read the top, the ordinance number in the first bold lettering.
Well, we don't have an ordinance number yet,
Right,
so just like
try to read the title.
without putting words in your mouth, I move to approve an ordinance adopting yada yada.
Perfect. Okay, I may, wait, a motion to approve the ordinance adopting a new article. Wow, I should have 19? No, 14 of chapter 9 of the Idaho Springs Municipal Code to establish a mobile food truck licensing program.
Okay, do we have a second?
I second it.
Okay, now discussion.
Only question I had, and pretty fire, was in the 6I where it talks about lighting, it says use only interior lighting. So does that mean you can't even light like a menu on the outside, or is that kind of just no need to worry about it?
That's a good point.
It's funny, I read that too, and I thought, oh, they gotta turn the lights on inside.
I don't know. I mean, I figure if it's left as is, it'll probably be a thing that's just excused. But I don't know if we care.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with your
Yeah.
reading that I think I mean, if you're playing it exactly by the book, an exterior light, on the food truck for a menu would be a violation. I guess,
I don't know if that's the level of thing we really care about, or if it'll just be kind of waived as long as it's appropriate.
Maybe just add no exterior lighting under that same section, use electrical lighting.
well, no, it says,
Well, it's pretty,
this is no exterior lighting. I think what Ken is saying is, what if there was a like light bulb on the outside of the truck?
Right.
I'm just trying to say there might be reasonable exterior
Yeah.
lighting is all I'm trying to say, but it might be that this is still good enough even with that. I just wanted to bring that up.
No, I think it's a good point. I mean, me as a girl, like if I'm thinking I'm gonna walk to a place, I would, if it's dark, I'm probably not gonna go that way, you know, like, and obviously I'm just talking about whatever random thing, but.
And they can be open till 1 AM, is that correct?
Yes.
That's,
1 to 9 or.
Yeah, the closest,
Yeah.
Anyway, that was the only
yeah.
thought I had on it.
So could we say something like, exterior lighting can only be used to display, to light up the menu, or you know, like
You
a
could
menu
add to
or
the
like
end,
the entry or like in one spot, I don't know.
you could add to the end or reasonable exterior lighting or for illumination or
You could
whatever.
really add whatever you
anything you
want.
want. You can
Yeah,
add
it's
anything you
really
want.
a pick 'em
Or
game.
you could just leave it.
How,
Like when people stand outside ordering, it's nice to have a little bit of light.
I do think that under this, if it was left as is, if there was enough light to illuminate the interior, there's obviously gonna be light coming out that would, you know, leak out onto the sidewalk and possibly the menu, but
That was kind of my question, that it's probably fine as is, but I just
Yeah.
wanted to bring it up in case.
Yeah,
to
up
get
to you
your
guys.
y'all's opinion.
it's not like they're gonna go park in a place in a dark spot where nobody can see them, you
That's
know?
true.
But,
the worry is,
Serve
I
as
think,
street
like
light.
floodlights, like coming
course.
off, like
Of
into
course.
people's homes
Yeah.
or something like that.
so could we be more specific of things that we do not want, maybe?
If you guys, reach a consensus and amend the motion to approve with a condition
With the
of that
changes, yeah.
change, then certainly.
Nick, question, how far are we from doing the lighting ordinance thing that we talked? Far, right?
I have no idea.
Yeah, we haven't even, that hasn't been discussed in years.
So, well, it's far, but, the question was if once we get that done, then we'll do it eventually. Could we include some of this stuff in that or not really? Or is it like too
It's hard
specific?
to say without knowing what the
What the whole
other
ordinance-
ordinance would look like.
It seems like we really just need to amongst the 5 of us decide if this is good enough or if we want to
I
change.
think it's good enough at this point,
I do too.
because there's gonna be streetlights if they are on the street in the
Probably fine.
designated parking lots. I
Okay.
mean, parking spaces for now. I mean, it's always something you can come back to later.
Okay.
I feel like it wouldn't hurt to add not floodlights, but
I mean, it already is pretty clear that you can't have any exterior lighting whatsoever.
Right.
yeah, you're right, the way it says that, so no. Well, I don't know.
Electrical exclude like solar lighting.
It's electrical.
Yeah, I don't think so.
I'm wondering if folks could, all right.
I'd say
Yeah.
it's electrical.
Okay, any other discussion? Okay, roll call.
Chair Cindy Olson,
Yes.
Chuck Howard,
Yes.
Don Reimer,
Yes.
Ursula Kuzma,
Yes.
Kent Slaymaker.
Yes.
So I forgot to go practice for you.
Say it.
Okay,
Who's that lady?
Kuzma.
lost the next one. That's one there, okay. The next one is consideration of animal regulation ordinance. Okay. And the same thing, the ordinance and then read the first line. Do we have a motion and a second?
I'll motion to approve an ordinance amending chapter 10 of the Idaho Springs Municipal Code to amend existing animal regulations and establish additional animal regulations.
I will second it.
Discussion?
I was.
No, I think we went over all this when we did the work session.
I do have one discussion point. It's in the poisoning area, section 1014. I'd like to remove insects from that. I'd like for it to not be allowed to poison insects in the city. And the reason for that may seem like a big deal or odd, but the reason I'd like to do it, if it's possible, if it's legal for us to do, is that insecticides aren't really necessary to control insects, especially in personal property type of situations within a city. Insecticides can harm water, soil, plants, pollination, wildlife, and humans. The NIH and the EPA have recommended against insecticide use for farms and for residential areas. The USGS has done a survey and found insecticides in every stream in the United States, as well as in 90% of all wells. That was in February of 2007, Gillian et al. Insecticides can also create resistant insects. And there are simple physical alternatives such as removal, natural spray, and keeping your plants healthy that can prevent negative insects without poisoning our soil, water, and ourselves. So personally, I'd like to take insects off the list.
I might have a recommendation for you.
Please.
That is going to fail this ordinance potentially because of the ramifications of that statement.
Yeah, it's a
what that
big
is.
deal, I understand.
I would suggest that it would be still something within your purview to look at those regulations for insecticides and pesticides, all of those kinds of things.
Yeah.
But it might be a better path to try to build an ordinance more specific to that particular.
That makes a lot of sense as long as we're kind of talking
yeah.
about it. I'm down.
Dylan and I have been talking about a planning agenda, and that's something that I think we had talked about, is making sure that you all have an opportunity to have these discussions that you want to have about ordinances or whatever you feel like we need to talk about, and make sure that that's planned into the year and has adequate work session time. But I think that especially since we haven't had a chance to discuss it at planning commission, it would be really good to put that in a work session and maybe bring that forward in a more purpose-built ordinance, maybe, because I hear what you're saying. I think it's very important to have that conversation. So,
well, I agree, and that makes a lot of sense to me. I'd love to do that. I understand. I'd hate to torpedo this thing that everything else I think is awesome, really good.
and it may not fail the ordinance. That's probably the wrong way to say that.
No, I understand.
It's just
It increases the risk.
It's a big thing to add on when it hasn't been discussed potentially.
Exactly.
Don't you think it's kind of covered though with it saying that it has to conform to applicable state and federal laws?
Well, this would be going more restrictive than state and federal laws, which
That's
goes to
fine.
Jonathan's point
Yeah.
that it would really be better in a purpose-built
Yeah.
law as opposed to just shoehorning it into something like this, that even if it didn't fail it might just be because people didn't notice it, and that would cause a problem. So I don't want to cause any problems, but I do think this is really important. So can we add that to a future work session?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize, Dylan. I should be asking you that.
It's no problem, I report to John.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah, I've added a note here to add that to what John said, kind of the plan for the year. And we'll probably go over some of that work plan maybe in February. So,
Okay, any other comments,
I
questions?
actually,
Yes.
I had something I wanted to bring up to you guys. If you look in that same, or in 10.3 cruelty to animals, subsection C, you'll see that the only addition was a fine of $300 and that this is existing code. When we were looking at this over, just wanted to draw your attention to the fact that if someone gets a second or more conviction of animal cruelty, they have a mandatory sentence of imprisonment and a fine of $300, not subject to suspension. Just bringing your attention that even though this is an existing code, making sure that we're comfortable with that, because when it's a sentence of imprisonment that is mandatory, it triggers a lot more rights court-wise, and you get right to an attorney. You know, you can get a jury trial if you want, and we thought it would being careful enough to say that we're fine with that as is, as it exists.
So it's the word mandatory that is you're questioning or thinking that we should be aware of, whether we want it mandatory or not.
Yes, mandatory imprisonment.
And in this case, the term suspension, what does that mean precisely?
Suspension basically means if you went to court and I was prosecuting you and you got a $150 ticket and you had a clean record, I would say, well, we're gonna suspend the fine, which basically means if you don't get in trouble for a year and you come back, then the fine goes away and it's like it never happened, essentially. So not subject to suspension means that no matter what, you're paying the $300, no matter what your future conduct looks like. Which, like I said, it's already existing code, so it's been in there since I think at least 2006 I saw, but just wanted to draw that to your attention.
Well, personally, thank you for bringing it to attention, and I'm personally not comfortable with mandatory minimums kind of in general. I know everyone loves animals and cruelty to animals is a hot button thing, but I think it would be weird to have more mandatory minimums for cruelty to animals than to people. And I'm not personally comfortable with that, even though it is pre-existing code. That's just me. What do y'all think?
I agree. So what is the minimum time?
Mandatory.
30 days, 10 days?
I believe I would have to look at the code, but most codes that I prosecute under, it's usually 1 to 364 days in jail. So I'd have to look at our code, but I would assume ours is similar cited.
So it's up to the judge, in other words.
It's up to the judge.
So you can get the mandatory minimum sentence of
1 day.
1 day or 2 days.
Yes, you could.
1 or 2 days can still turn a person's life. Just saying, you can lose your job, you can lose your housing. It could result in more cruelty to those animals if housing is lost. Just saying.
Well, if the guy goes to jail for 2 days for killing his dog, I think 2 days in jail is a fairly
I
normal thing.
agree with you, and I trust the judge to make that
Yeah.
decision. I don't think we, in our inexpertise, need to force the judge's hand. But that's my opinion.
Yeah, it's
What do
1
you
to
find in
364.
others that you have?
What was that?
You said you have others that you represent.
Oh, I was just saying like for jail time, and it's the same here, the same general penalty of fine up to 2,650 and jail not to exceed 364 days, which is kind of what you see around the state.
So you find the jail sentence is part of,
Well, it's usually
that goes with it.
maybe fined, maybe, put in jail or a fine. It's rare. I've only, I don't prosecute full time, but where I prosecute, I've never seen anything where a jail sentence is
Just mandatory.
automatically triggered.
So I think, like you said, strike mandatory. But you want something that has teeth in it though, too, because you also don't want the judge to just be so lenient, which happens too. You get somebody that come in, I'm sure you experience it here, and then the judge doesn't enforce our own rules.
I have never seen a jail sentence
In
imposed
animal.
just for any municipal court, cause of action. If you're comfortable with a second conviction, meaning that you got to spend some amount of jail time, which I would presume is a small amount, a few days at the most, but that's really the question.
Well, that's what this is saying, a second or subsequent
Yes.
conviction.
I still say it should be up to a judge trained in these matters, not us untrained. personally. And if it's rare to see this type of thing, then that seems to answer your question, Cindy, that it is not common.
I don't have faith in the judges themselves.
Well, that's your personal opinion. Then we should vote them out and vote a different one in.
I agree.
I don't think that we need to be prescribing.
So if we all
Makes
agree that
sense.
mandatory should be taken out,
And then
Do
not
we-
subject to suspension.
You could also not change it and just like direct staff to leave a note for the council to look at this and make that decision. I mean, you don't have to.
or can we say, we don't want that, can you figure out a better, take it out and rewrite it?
Yeah, we can say like, to try to achieve this goal, you know?
Yeah,
Rewrite it in such a way that achieves this
yeah,
goal.
and then, and let it go straight to council, or do we have to?
I think you could say that as a fine is of 300 is mandatory. Because then the judge would have to do the $300 fine and shall be subject to the suspension or
Yeah, and just take out the
This-
probation or parole part.
right, and is subject to, right? Maybe the judge will give them 1 day in jail or something, but it's subject to that. It's not
Right.
written in
mandatory.
here. It's not
Right,
mandatory,
exactly.
yeah. But leave it to where it has some teeth in there to make people aware of, you don't pull this a second time or a third time or a fourth time.
Exactly.
But this 300 shall be mandatory and then subject to, how's it saying?
I mean, we don't have to come up with exact wording.
That's kind of what I was
Staff's
asking,
capable
like,
of
do
that.
we need to do that, or?
Well,
We do.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
if we're gonna.
We do, we have
If
to.
we wanna
put
send
the
it
wording
straight
in.
down. Okay.
So you have to amend the motion to include the wording that says, within the minimum and maximum term, and a fine of $300 shall be mandatory and subject
And
to
shall not be subject to
sentence
suspension.
of imprisonment and subject to suspension. Somehow where you move that sentence of imprisonment is subject to imprisonment.
No, yeah, I would suggest taking out from the third line, from a sentence all the way down to the underlined and, so it'd be or the underlined A, so a fine of $300
Yeah.
shall be mandatory
Yeah.
and shall not be subject to suspension, period, and then crossing out
The nor.
the nor to the end of the sentence.
Okay, do you need that read or are you okay with?
I think if you came to consensus on that and just said, move to approve, with amendments as directed to staff, I think that's fine.
Okay, so who made the motion?
I did.
Do you want to amend the motion to?
I want to make sure I clarify and understand what you're saying first. You're saying strike the bit before the sentence of imprisonment, or are you
Yep.
saying move?
Strike
Strike
from just strike a sentence of imprisonment with minimum and maximum terms and so it just reads, a fine of $300 shall be mandatory and shall not be subject to suspension, period.
Yeah.
And then nor shall such person to the end of that sentence is also struck.
Thank you.
If you guys are fine with that,
Yep.
that's the consensus.
So you can just say amend the motion to that
I would like to amend the motion as directed.
and
Oh.
then,
Can, I still have some.
Oh.
Yeah, if there's other changes, then yeah, please.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it will
Sorry.
changes, but I do have some questions. No, so it's fine. So I saw on section 10.6, reading all those details, it seemed to me that some paragraphs were very specific and other ones weren't very much. So, I was thinking, how can we, I think that it's good to have specifics for people to read and know. But I don't know if we feel like it would be helpful for them to mention some kind of statute or regulations that they need to, where these numbers or information has come from, for them to be able to get that. For example, number 3, it talks about the chicken coop and run shall be maintained in a clean fashion and regularly clean to control dust. I don't know, like, I mean, I don't think it's that big of a deal, but I feel like that is one of the things that I think a different neighbor can, feel like this is dust and another one not. So I don't know if we know where all these detailed paragraphs came from, that we can maybe inform where this is coming from, so people can go there to find out more details about how you're supposed to control dust and odor and waste and all those things.
Well, from our work session, we directed Wonder to come up with the ordinance, and she brought this all to the work session. And this is
I think some of the idea
what we
was
came with.
to leave it a little vague, because
There's some
you
existing.
can't like say so many parts per million are allowed in the air or something. And if it really gets to that point, it'll be for,
That really
City
hard to
council or
figure out,
judge.
regulate or whatever.
yeah.
Okay, but is it a thing to put in this kind of ordinances, like just direct people to more information or more details, or not?
I
Ordinances
think,
are
I
more like to tell them what's up.
mean, details make it kind of harder to enforce, because like, how do you measure something like that? And then you have to like train someone to know how to measure that. I think the idea here is just to be in line with the nuisance code, so if the dust, odor, and waste got so crazy as to constitute a nuisance, then you would, I think the enforcement mechanism would more so be a nuisance action against the property rather than a revocation action. I think that's the intention, is just to make it more, I know this isn't what you want to hear, but maybe more subjective. So like a code enforcement officer could say this is a nuisance, and then you bring the nuisance action and you get in front of the judge, and the judge decides whether or not that constitutes a nuisance under the code language.
Okay. I'm trying to figure out a way that it could be easier. So Wonder, I imagine that you pull all this detail, like for example, at least 4 square feet each fowl, or like a very specific square footage. Are you saying you pull that out from somewhere? And could you can we have like a paper, like a document, it lives in the city, that whoever comes in wants information about this, you can hand out, and is where all these details came from, and just in a way, and I'm saying, obviously now I'm talking about not modifying anything about that, but just trying to have like a how do you say that, like a template for people that is interested in doing that to come and see what's up, and then that way we have kind of a like, even the SAC can go to that document and be like, okay, too much dust means this, and just have
That's not
some.
any different than any other ordinance. We don't go into all that detail with
I know,
every
but
ordinance.
I know that that there is kind of hard for just normal people, locals, residents, to come and find the information they need, and I feel like if we have that information just to provide for them, will be good.
Staff does work with people in that capacity when they do come for things, like that's a pretty frequent activity. We have a bunch of template letters that we give people, but it's very context sensitive, because like not every situation is always the same. But I can tell you that's a goal of council, is for us to provide good information to people about that. And so like Dylan regularly does it, but Wonder does as well. Like an example would be like a special event permit. Like she will help, and Patty will help like make sure people know how to engage in that activity. And so while I don't know exactly what we can what we can create specifically. This is something that we do regularly and we would continue to do so. On the staff level.
Yeah, I'm probably just thinking of something like a library that we can have here that people can have resources to get from, but yeah, got
We
it.
do have our code posted
Yeah, you're not-
online. It's all publicly available to everyone. And I think that that's something that we're getting a new website in like 3 weeks, probably 3 to 6 weeks, we'll have a new website up and it's a lot easier to navigate. And I think that you'll find that this information is more accessible on the new website than it was on the old to get to the code. So I think that some of your goals may be just achieved through the normal goals of the city. And we can always work to make, these templates more available. That's one of the things we're trying to do and make it more user-friendly on all of that kind of stuff.
No, and I know you guys do that all the time. I was just thinking of way that,
Okay,
People
we're
can
kind of
have
getting
it.
off track. We have the ordinance in front of us. Do you have any
Yes.
other
absolutely, I do.
discussion?
So then 10.6, 9. I feel like it reads weird, just saying slaughtering, so I was gonna suggest that we remove the first word. Cause slaughtering or display of slaughtered fowl, like a slaughtering is the action of slaughtering, so.
That's what they do. cut the
So
ribs off
no
and slaughter
slaughtering,
them.
so people cannot slaughter the animals at all.
That's typical,
Yeah.
for livestock. You're not allowed to slaughter.
That's
your
what we're
livestock
saying is,
usually.
no, you
They're
can't
not
slaughter
allowed
them.
to do it,
You're not, that's very typical all through the US.
you're not allowed to slaughter your own.
That's right, small farmers are very rarely allowed to slaughter their own animal, you have to send them to a slaughtering.
And they're in
facility.
city limits, sitting your neighbors.
And then,
You don't
and yeah,
wanna
this isn't
slaughter
even a
them.
farm, but like an actual, like the local
I
farm.
grew up in
that
Peru,
road,
I grew up
yeah.
watching in the market, just killing
Yeah.
animals there, but, okay, cool,
Uh,
thank you for the information, cause I had no clue that was a thing. I think it's crazy.
I know,
I agree, but it is.
we had chickens in the backyard when I got old.
Okay, you guys, let's.
That's all.
I couldn't do
Okay.
it with Bonnie's Winter game, yeah, I'll do it. That was it, all done.
Okay, so we had. I've lost track there.
Ken needs to amend his.
Yes. Okay.
I'd like to amend as directed and noted before.
Okay. And whether,
Would we like to note it again?
Let's just
Yes,
all right,
please.
let's try to just workshop this here. So we're gonna amend and move to approve, as usual, reciting the ordinance title again. My apologies for making.
well, we have a motion on the table already, so we should withdraw that motion first.
Yeah,
Okay.
well, once that happens, so we're gonna re-motion with the full title read, move to approve, yada, yada, with the condition that the amendments to section 10.3C as directed to staff, or, yeah.
I need to remove, I'd like to remove my previous motion. I would like to move to approve an ordinance amending chapter 10 of the Idaho Springs Municipal Code to amend existing animal regulations and establish additional animal regulations with the modification to section 10.3C as directed.
A second,
I'll second.
roll call,
There's Cindy Olson,
yes.
Chuck Howard,
Yes.
Don Reimer,
Yep, yes.
Ursula Kuzulek,
Yes.
and Slaymaker.
Yes.
Okay, with that, we will adjourn the meeting at,
You know what, right before you do, I just wanna quickly put out there something Wonder mentioned to me at the beginning of the meeting. This is your turn, the letters of interest.
Oh.
Yeah.
Hey, Planning Commission. Okay, there are 3 of you whose terms expire next month. So I think we have a great board and I hope you all are still very interested in serving. So it is Cindy, Don, Uchi. So if you are still interested in serving on Planning Commission, I just need a letter of interest saying that you would like to remain on the board. So the sooner the better, if you can get that to me would be great.
I thought I just did it.
Yeah, so I just did it too.
You didn't. And now time flies like crazy. And then in March, a chair and a vice chair need to be elected by the board, so that's coming in March. But February, your guys' terms are up.
Now we'll adjourn the meeting at 6:40 PM. And now we'll go into the work session.
Okay. And are you all happy to just stay up there?
Yeah, that's
Oh, whatever.
And have a great night, Wanda.
in lieu, fee in lieu.
Bye, Ingrid.
Bye, Wonder. Okay, who's taking this? Dylan?
I can get started. Just a second to scroll to John's memo. Essentially, last month, as you all know, we started this discussion at city council's direction to modify and explore ways to various alternatives to programs to make it more effective. Since that time, we've come up with a variety of sort of 4 potential changes to the current fee in lieu. That involves expansion so that it becomes citywide, expanding it beyond just the historic district, including loading spaces into the fee in lieu ordinance, so that if you cannot provide a required loading space per section 21-130, you could potentially do a fee in lieu for that. A use-based parking multiplier, which John has a sort of like a calculator spreadsheet that I think will show to sort of get a little bit more to what we're talking about, but essentially allows us to better, I guess, capture the impact of a business on our parking facilities. So a business that needs 30 spaces, maybe has a different rate than a business with 1 space. And the final one being a potential after hours parking requirement for events that would be events outside of paid parking hours. Say there's a venue that has wants to put on a special event that needs 50 parking spaces. Under current ordinance, you wouldn't have to pay for that, and I think it's a bit of a question on whether they'd be able to do all that parking, but potential option would be to charge some sort of nominal fee to expand your allowed parking for that venue. Say someone wanted to put on a concert and that concert will have 20 spaces.
Where would we have that?
So, well, the ball fields
I know, but is
downtown.
that,
Well, ball fields wouldn't necessarily be included because it's outside of the historic district,
Right, you're
right?
talking about a citywide expansion too.
Right, so that could be a reason.
But there's downtown events too.
And there are potential spaces that could serve as, like a concert venue that maybe has a certain, could happen in the future, I think more so than now. I don't know of anywhere that necessarily would hold a special event.
so you would take a place like the United Center as an example, would they have to?
They're kind of grandfathered in right now just because they're pre-2018.
Mhm.
What I was thinking is that we have the shared parking reduction table that in our parking code. That is like 2 principal uses in a mixed use development. But what we could do is say also, we know that after 6 PM or 7 PM or whatever, we have different parking need downtown or wherever, because I did recommend expanding this to the whole city just for a CCAE or any of those projects. But if we have different parking requirements, we may be able to create a shared parking reduction table the same way where you could double count parking, like for instance, if there's school in the morning and then not, there's another event in the evening, they could both use those same spaces for their calculation. And we had talked about, like, if you have a place that could have a venue, like say downtown, there's a music venue or something that comes, they may have most of their events happening after 6 or after 7 or whatever it is. So it's unlikely that we'd have the same capacity issues in the parking lots that we would before. So it was just trying to come up with alternatives to kind of like think about how we manage those things more contextually, maybe.
I find the event one difficult, because how do you know when there's an event, or say a place decides to have an event?
Well, I think the
How
idea
does the
was,
city know that? Like,
well, we have a special events permitting process.
right, but that's when they're closing the street off and there's a big event. I mean, if you're talking
this is
like
talking
a
about.
music venue in
You could
one of
use
the
it,
restaurants or
you
something.
can use our special event process indoors, but the thing is, and the reason why it would probably be a good trigger is because if I had a place like that and I wanted to have liquor involved and I don't have a liquor license, which is most likely what would happen in any foreseeable case. They would have to get a special events license for that, and they can only get 14 through a year. So they could have 14 events without an invite list throughout the year potentially. But that idea, I think, does need to kind of, to your point, I think we haven't fully vetted that idea yet and how it would work. We just think that there's an opportunity for like a shared parking, a AM, PM kind of shared parking situation that we don't currently allow. It may be logical just based on like how we see business happening in the city.
Like up in previous places I've worked, if you could prove that like, let's say there's a strip mall, one's a coffee shop, one's a bar, they're not gonna be open at the same time, so why would we make you have the same amount of parking for, like, have 10 spaces for bar and 10 spaces for a coffee shop, when instead you could just use those 10 spaces?
Okay, you're talking that kind of shared. That to me, I guess the events is what. throws
We
me
had
off.
just been thinking, we had a request from somebody who's thinking about developing a project. If they had like, let's say that their daily occupancy, their typical use is like 49 or something. Well, maybe their space could hold 300 or whatever it is. Would there be a path where they could have an event when that happens, like the 300 people, and maybe pay a fee for the additional use that would put? And the other reason this might come into play is we do have special events that happen downtown, such as Ride the Rockies, where we do have a pretty big parking impact, which we don't currently charge in special events for any parking that you might use in the city. And it might be a way to start thinking about that, but it's kind of we just wanted to present it to you guys to see what you thought about the potential.
That one seems like it's worth developing and talking about, but doesn't seem like it's refined yet.
I think that it could come to you in a later conversation. I think the really critical piece here is, I think the loading zones is a little bit important, because it's kind of in the downtown, especially if you have a loading zone that takes away other parking for other businesses. And then expanding the district, I think a little bit, the program works very well. I think it can be functional throughout the city. And I think especially like with the redevelopment at the old school building and things like that are happening, it might be nice to have some resources like that available, because parking is constrained everywhere.
I think citywide expansion is a good idea. The loading, do we have, like downtown, do people have problem with the?
Yeah, there are two big
Set
examples that I'd
spots.
say. Well, what happens is loading, it's difficult sometimes. We have an ordinance that says you cannot deliver after 10 a.m., but
Right.
it doesn't get followed very much because, I think the businesses are mostly at the whim of the company delivering things.
Right.
Westbound, it happens frequently where they'll pull a truck perpendicular to their loading door and they block the entire lane of traffic. And so it's something that's been caused some safety concerns and hazard in the parking areas, especially during the summertime.
Mhm.
A lot of like an FDP actually any change of use requires a parking plan, and part of that requires a 35-foot long loading zone. And we know that a lot of these, especially larger uses, probably do need some sort of loading. And so if we put loading zones into this equation, if it is necessary for the business, it just allows us to capture
Mhm.
the impact basically.
And each project still is subject to approval, that we say they can pay a fee instead of having the spots. So I mean, if we really think that they do need it, it doesn't have to be allowed.
The gym is a good example of that. They're not going to get deliveries from large trucks. They're only going to be like a van or something bringing toilet paper. So that was part of that staff report. We recommended that we allow them to use just a regular parking spot for loading, and that could still happen in the future potentially.
It's interesting, Vail banned all,
All trucks.
yeah,
Yeah,
and it's like, how does that one work? All those restaurants and everything, yeah.
There's a lot of questions about how
those.
does bail work, in my opinion.
They have little pickups and they gotta unload it to the pickup basically and drive it to the premise.
I thought, wow, that's pretty hardcore, okay. So what are you asking for to approve or for direction on, yes, research all of these and let's incorporate
Well, there's
these
actually
into it?
we have a little bit of a weird process we need to go through on this one.
Okay,
Council is really wanting to go ahead with these ordinance changes, and I have a like Dylan said, this calculator I'd like to show you about how we might calculate parking fee in lieu.
mhm,
So in this particular case, one of the challenges is that council needs to hear this probably the first in work session, the first week in February. So it's going to be in very close proximity to when you're meeting. And so what I'd really like to do, if you guys are comfortable with it, and I can get the direction, if we can get some of these changes to occur, and then I would like to show you this impact fee thing I've created and like something similar to this. We can create that ordinance, it can go to council in work session, and then it can come to you guys on Wednesday. And then they can start their process at the following regular meeting, which would be the second week. And so I think the goal ultimately is just to, I think we think the ordinance works pretty well. Council just wanted this slight adjustment. I thought it's a good opportunity to look at those loading zones and expanding it, just for modifying the ordinance anyway. If you look up here though, this is the other piece of it that I've been working on. This I've talked to Carmen and Nick about a little bit. I think the concept here is sound, but how this calculation works might change. Can you guys see that, or is it too small?
this is small.
Go a little bigger, if we can fit on the screen.
I don't know if I can zoom in too much, but I'll try it. So it's gonna be chunked out, that's right. So I just built a calculator and I was thinking about how parking happens. And really what we're talking about is the impact of a new business's parking on the current facilities, right? So what I did is I built this spreadsheet to calculate a couple of things. One is, what is the cost of a parking space? I put 65,000 because that's the number we've been using, but that's a variable. Time period that we're trying to recover this money, that's another variable. And then this just breaks down what that equals if you annualize it and have a monthly payment. Then over here in this middle column, these are different types of uses, and I stole this out of what we did with the business improvement districts that we were working on for a while. But generally what this is saying is that different types of uses have different impacts on the parking facilities. Housing in particular, because you can get a residential permit, the impact of that on our parking facilities is actually very minimal. And so what I did here is this is just me kind of playing with it, but I have affordable housing set as 0 because we want to promote affordable housing when we can. That doesn't have to happen though. I have market rate housing as a 0.25 impact. There's a really very small amount of parking that's required for a multifamily unit like we'd see in the downtown core. So I just set that there, that could change. And then these spaces, office space, retail space, hotel space, restaurant space, gathering space, I just set them at 1. So you just get, that's the multiplier for it. And then I created this large space multiplier because we know that some uses that could happen downtown, like if you had a really big restaurant come that has 100 employees and may see like 500,000 people a year, the impact on that is going to be much greater. So I figure they can, that's a fair kind of way to look at it. Over here, you can enter what that impact score is. You can enter the parking facility size and the total number of parking spaces required for the use. And then down here, is the math. So I just calculate the percentage impact based on the total facility value that we have from that cost to recover, which is in this case, $65,000. And then the use multiplier you have. And then I break out what the value of those spaces are based on that impact. And then what the annualized cost would potentially be total, a monthly cost, and like what the per space cost is. So this approach, this calculator, it's not so important necessarily what the numbers are because I honestly just made them up so I could show you how this could work. But what it could do is it would let us measure the impact of any use on the parking facilities. And so over time, one of the things that we could do, and I kind of put alternatives in my staff report, like we could just charge a flat fee for parking and then just do the 20-year time period, which is really what we have. And we can make that recommendation back to council again. But something like this would let us have a greater degree of measurement of the impact. And it's very similar. I guess the other thing to note is this is what we do for utility billing. It's a relatively common practice. Like if you can measure a bigger impact, like a stronger level of waste in wastewater, you can have a multiplier for that. And we do that currently. So that's why I thought this might be a possible way to address the problem. Like we can still set cost to recover. It could be 20,000. I think ultimately, the direction that I would really need and that Nick would need if this is something we want to do, is I really need to figure out like what the cost to recover would be, the time period would be, and how you guys feel about these impact scores, and if these are close to what we'd want, or if we'd want to do something different potentially.
I agree with having the different multipliers with, because like a restaurant space might cost this much, you know, if somebody's opening a store, it costs this much instead of them all being a flat rate. But how cumbersome is that for keeping track of for the city? I mean, is it?
I think, and I guess Nick, you might answer this better. I talked to Carmen about this a little bit, and in our utility system that we do the same thing.
Right.
We have a little spreadsheet that has that multiplier rate, so it has the different kind of uses with their
Right.
multiplier. And then it's a simple matter of just plugging in the number. So if it's like a 10, like say the use is a 10, then it's just 10 times multiplier basically.
I remember when we developed all that
Yeah,
with it. I was involved in all that at the time.
How does
So
that
it
get
could work
updated?
with parking.
it could be updated on a period determined by council or by you guys potentially with council. We have what we call a rate schedule. That's a ordinance as well that has all the rates of the city in it, and it's updated annually. And that could potentially be something we look at here. And the same thing happens with like water and wastewater rates. It's an annual update based on a study. And that could be something that a way to look at those costs, because it's possible and probable that whatever the cost to recover is, when we're like a fully built out parking situation, then we're talking about O&M, we're not talking about capital costs, and it could potentially change in the future depending on the parking facility. So there's some variable there potentially, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. You could say it's a $20,000 we're recovering per space, and then you just calculate it that way based on the.
I like the calculating option.
And it's in line with the other stuff that. you
Yeah,
already do,
I think
other
Nick was-
business processes.
I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, Nick, but I think those are the really important factors is what, the key here is that we want to make sure that this is like there needs to be like a nexus to what we're charging for, and then these multipliers, we have to like have a reasonable case for why we're doing them. And one of the things that we were originally talking about with parking fee in lieu was to promote the development of second story residential in the downtown district. That was one of the things we wanted to do. And so that's one of the reasons why I was thinking maybe the impact for those, which if you're talking about an apartment is typically like one space, maybe that's not quite the same as the impact of a different use. And then I think there was comments in the boba tea shop application consideration that, we recognize as small retail and a small scale tea shop, the impact on the facilities are not really that different, even though in code there's a slightly different number. And that's another tack we could take too, is look at our parking regulations. But I think overall, like if it's a one for one and it's a one for the other, it really kind of gets at that same point that those uses are very similar potentially. So
You would think, yeah, because whether it's a restaurant or retail, it's rotating a car, what do they say, every 3 hours?
yeah,
So wouldn't the rate be the same?
it could be. Our parking regulations is
Residential
like,
would be different.
is it 1 to 250 and 1 to 300, I think is the difference or something on gross
Yeah,
floor area.
and certain ones are 1 to 400 as well.
Yeah.
It kind of depends, like our parking regulations do have slightly different calculated requirements, thinking that some uses are slightly more intensive.
And there's a larger movement to kind of loosen parking regulations all over the country, and as much as I'm for that, mountain towns like us kind of are a special case.
Yeah,
Probably gonna have to be a bit more nuanced. than
the
all of
equity
us is.
piece isn't the same as in an urban environment, for
Right,
sure.
exactly.
Okay, so you're looking for direction. So it sounds like we're
I think
liking,
the easiest way is going through the first 4 changes and getting a consensus on each one.
okay,
And then I think we can come back with an ordinance based off of that, I would say.
I do have one more question before we do that, if it's okay. The second section where it says additionally, the staff recommends one of the following, the use-based parking multiplier is repeated there. Are you saying that it's like an either or of the
Yes.
fee or the multiplier?
Kind of,
Or or I mean,
I
suggesting,
kind of think
mean,
so. The thing is that I keep thinking, and I guess Nick feedback here too. You kind of need, one of the things we need to do to make this, I think, really above board is there needs to be a nexus between the amount of money we're trying to recover and what we're doing, because we can't just set like a monthly fee and lease out a parking space. That's not gonna, I think there would be some challenges with that from a, based on my conversations with Carmen. So I think what we need to do is have that, we need to have that idea of what the cost to recover is, which is why I think that fee is important. But we also talked about maybe it's possible to just set in the fee schedule that's annualized by the city by ordinance, that there could just be a fee for a parking space, an annual fee. And you could annualize it as well, but it would be, in mind, like 3250 is 65,000 divided by 20, something like that. But something where there's a nexus to like what we're recovering. And I think what council had really wanted may not be 100% possible. I don't think we can continue charging in perpetuity for all of this. I think there needs to be a sunset for it. And Nick, I don't know if what your opinion is about that either, or your thoughts are.
No, I don't really have an opinion.
I think we-
Because it comes to a Tabor question is really what it is at the end of the day,
I
because
think we agreed on that at the last meeting, the work session that we did on this, that we agreed that just doing the flat over the 20 years was not the best way to do it, to go back to doing it by the month. I think we're all on board with
Okay.
that. So then it goes through those four and then the one or the other. And it's sounding like we're all liking the parking multiplier.
well, but I like Nick's suggestion of it.
Yeah,
go
but
through them
start,
point by
yeah,
point,
but because that's a separate one down there. It seems like we've all agreed on that one, but now go through the 1 through 4. So citywide expansion,
Yes.
It makes sense to me.
yeah, I think, yeah,
I wondered why we didn't
We
do that from the
didn't do it.
beginning, but that's how you can tell it's a good idea. So you wonder why you didn't do it before.
I think the loading space too, yeah.
And I'm sorry, with the loading spaces, would this be something that the city provides or is something that the business have to provide? I'm sorry.
this is kind of the thing about the fee in lieu. This is a situation where the business can't provide it, so the city has to provide it. And so a loading space takes away probably 2 to 8 parking spaces and potentially could block traffic in a way that isn't beneficial. So what we're saying is that we're using this fee to measure that impact because they're not able to provide their own 35-foot long space.
Instead of just telling them, no, they can't do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we still have the option to approve or disapprove the specific case.
Mhm.
Okay.
Okay, use based,
So is that a yes on loading?
yes.
Yes,
Yes.
okay.
That was it.
Yes.
Use based parking, that's the same as the one below, right?
Yeah, 3 and 1 are the same.
Okay,
I wanted to present that separately just because it's like a kind of an either or, but
okay, so let's go to 4. I'm still confused on the event thing.
It seems like it's two different issues. Am I correct in saying that, where there's both like some specific event where a business will go well over their typical usage, but there's also the concept of your coffee shop and bar example, where just AM and PM might have different uses.
right.
And you might be able to share between different uses.
Right, which those are 2 different things.
Is that correct?
yeah, and it could be, another possibility would be to bring some idea like back, if we look at parking regulations and specifically the shared parking reduction table in chapter 21, we could do that at a later time and look at whether that makes sense. It really came up in relation to the potential project at CCAE, which is the new theater group that is an arts group that's working at the school district and the school itself, because there's just limited parking resources over there. So we were thinking, how can we accommodate what you just said, in a way that makes sense and doesn't create problems in the future.
Right.
So
And you guys did come up parking. They're gonna have enough parking up there?
Well, so they'll have enough for phase 1, which is the elementary school and the early childhood education, based on our parking table. The arts theater use, which is phase 2,
Yeah,
they won't. And so the idea is potentially, and this could be applied anywhere in the city, like if we could count those 39 spaces that they're proposing on site for the elementary school during the day. And then at night, you know, if they show we're only using the theater for public use at night, those 39 spaces can count for their requirement as well, and at least meet some of their requirements.
That makes sense.
Obviously, the question mark with any of that would be, how does that get enforced? Like, do we somehow make it so they cannot operate the theater during the day?
Right.
That kind of, or any use in general, right? Like, what happens when they expand hours? I guess we reconsider parking need at that
And then the
time.
parking lot at the bottom is no longer used or not available, or I heard
The one on the east side,
the one at the bottom of the hill of the high school.
the bottom of the, on their side of the street or the other
Across
side,
the street. yeah.
that's city property and it may not be there. That's the potential location for the fire station.
Right, which, I mean, I remember when my kids were in school, there was never enough parking up there. Yeah,
Yeah. It would, I mean, if.
And they
we
got
could
to
keep
use
that
that
parking,
lot
that'd be
then.
great, but-
right? You remember?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
We're exploring other options with them too, because everybody's trying to work on the same
yeah,
path
Yeah.
here, but it's just. This could be a way to look at that, but we could bring that back in maybe a further review of like the parking regulations.
okay, but that's kind of the event part of it there again, so I guess we're still confused on number 4.
I mean, I feel pretty clear on
And I
that.
would say for after hours events, it is pretty confusing. I guess like some people might say during the day, we'll cap our occupancy at 50, but our space actually fits 250. So is there a way that we can, after 6, operate as 250 instead of 50 to avoid having to pay for 200 parking spaces or whatever? Like, we'll only pay a small fee because we're using it only after 6. But we'd still capture something from that because they're getting this special sort of allowance beyond what their normal occupancy is.
So you wanna
that's
put
not
that-
super fleshed out.
In the ordinance somehow where it's got that wording or that,
I think we just wanted
Being
to
able
talk
to do
about
it.
it, and I think one of the things I'm hearing is it's a little bit complicated, maybe it's gonna be difficult to. Based on what you're saying, like it probably is gonna be difficult to make sure that they're following the rules.
I'm also hearing occupancy and parking being used kind of interchangeably. And I mean,
Right now, our parking code is like based on occupancy,
Yeah,
but it's not necessarily the same
right.
exactly, like there's
Yeah.
some, because occupancy is really like a building code thing and parking regulations were created by the city and they're tied. But they're not
I
necessarily.
understand that they're
And our,
connected,
our parking regulations have 2 different standards within them. One is for like a retail shop, it's 1 space per certain amount of gross floor area. But for an event venue, it says like 1 space per 4 seats.
that makes
And
sense.
so when
I
you're
see.
saying, well, our square footage is 10,000, so we'd be allowed X number of people, but because of the number of seats, the number of seats is different. So, instead of having 12 spaces required, you might need 50 spaces because you're packing in seats. And so,
And it thinks about a theater, it doesn't think about like a stand-up kind of venue or something like that.
yeah, that's where it gets confusing as well, is you think about like cabaret style event with tall table, you stand in it, you have a drink. Like,
Fixed
is that a theater or is that a bar? When there's live performance.
There's a question about fixed seats
oh,
too,
that's
which,
interesting. I never thought of that that way too, yeah.
So that's where we're kind of struggling with perhaps like some of the theater stuff at the Arts and Education Center, as well as some of the theaters don't have theater style seating, but they might wheel in seats for a children's event or something. So getting to an ability to either change parking regulations to capture that or put it some other way that people can do that might be beneficial for those sorts of creative uses or like that.
So personally, I'd like to see the AM, PM kind of parking sharing and the special events kind of separated in both investigate. I think they both make a lot of sense, but they probably both can have a lot of nuance and how to phrase it and how to enforce it. What do y'all think?
Yeah, no, I think so too, because to me, they're 2 different things, 2 different applications, let's put it that way, and especially like for the events thing, and you think of the school, not having thought of that, you wanna make something be able to work than not work, so. Coming up with something to make it work. I was just thinking of, you guys were thinking of places like downtown where they had an event and now we're gonna try to adjust parking and pay for parking and stuff, but
Yeah, I don't think the event, like, I don't think like 4th of July, for example, we would try to
oh,
do
no.
any sort of parking thing, but no.
I mean, I can't think of what you would, well, like you said, ride the Rockies, but that doesn't even really make
We have
sense.
several events in the like past 3 or 4 years that have significantly impacted downtown.
Uh-huh.
And we have paid parking, so they just pay for parking when they do that too, which isn't a problem. We can figure that out. It's just kind of like a special events parking is kind of a area we haven't really focused on in our work yet.
Have there been special events that haven't been able to happen due to parking?
Yes,
Well, there you go.
but it's more been not direct, not like we would deny a business. It's like a function of like just, expediency or something. So
Right.
on the ordinance that we're putting together, I guess if we leave out number 4, are you guys comfortable with this? And it sounds like you guys are comfortable with the parking fee multiplier. Are you wanting to have a conversation about what the multipliers look like for different uses, or?
Well, are we settled on, if it's kind of an either or for the multiplier as far as recovering some fixed cost versus the perpetual monthly fee? I mean, are we?
Well, you're asking like is it restaurant, is it residential?
Yeah.
Is it commercials? I mean,
Well, it sounds like
retail?
you may need to talk about fee versus multiplier still. But then I guess my question would be, if we do go with the multiplier, that would be, I think the thing that we need to determine is like how we determine
Which one?
which ones they are. And if that made sense to you when I showed you, like retail, restaurant, general are the same. And then if you have a large use, like over 10 spaces required, it kicks you into that higher category maybe.
Can you put it up again?
Sure.
In general, it made a lot of sense to me.
Mhm.
As far as specific numbers and categories, I don't know.
And I think keeping it simple enough, I don't think there's a big difference in retail and restaurant. I mean, because the idea of the parking is to rotate the cars, office space, okay, so how do you,
And John, your multiplier, you said that in total part, do you have the large spaces where if you need more than 10 spaces, right?
Yeah, or some kind of trigger like that.
So then the multiplier would ratchet up if you're like, I'm a restaurant and my parking is 50 instead of 4, then you're paying each additional space at a higher rate.
Now, is it each additional space like tax brackets, or is it like your original ones too?
I put it at 1.25. That's again, me just putting numbers in to make sure the math worked.
Yeah, but are your first 10 spaces also multiplied?
I see, it's like a graduated system.
I'm asking, I mean,
I think that,
I think they should be personally, I
Yeah.
don't think it should be bracketed.
well,
I think
that's over if they can't meet the code.
Yeah.
Where are we gonna get a business that's gonna come in that's gonna need 10 spaces extra?
well, say I'm like, say one of our big spaces that's already developed were to change ownership and it was vacant for a year and then it changed ownership, but they're gonna use the same thing.
Okay,
A Bojo's use is like pretty close to 200 spaces or more.
right,
So that would be where like you have like this massive impact on the parking facilities, which is, I guess, in a way, it's already something that's already happening, but
And
it's.
but it
it's-
wouldn't be change of use for the property, so it wouldn't
Well, if it's-
affect,
If it was vacant for a year, it would be.
okay.
well, we have hotel properties with 10 spaces. There's the application for the opera house music venue. I mean, that's pretty big interior space. They might, I could see them hitting that much.
Yeah.
Well, and the other thing
Maybe.
is if it was expanded beyond the downtown,
Exactly.
like you could convert something that has a very small parking use to like a big restaurant, do a big addition to it and then use the parking, or you could probably combine a few retail storefronts and do another big restaurant or something potentially.
You could also assign each business potentially some X number of spaces, to your point, Kent. Like you stay in a certain category for whatever, and then if you go out of that for any business, you pay that may actually not work, because and maybe the multiplier doesn't really, it may not really work. Like that's where we run into a problem, is because that's gonna happen, like something like that is gonna happen. And graduating it may be a good idea, but the problem is that what I had tried to do is measure the total impact on the facility, like of the whole parking use instead of just one space. Because that's where you kind of like start,
Well, okay, so for a place that requires, let's say, just to put it into the larger space one. So an example, so I can kind of understand
okay, let's
a
say
little
that,
more, if a place required 12, but they could only supply 11. I mean, there'd only be one spot that they're paying for, is that correct?
Yeah.
well, I think you go either way, because what you would do, we could do it that way.
No, that's
But-
how you would do it.
Well, I don't
Because they
think-
only need one
Yeah.
space, they have 11, you're saying 11.
I was saying they're able to provide 11, but the code says they need 12.
Right.
Oh, well, they only need to pay for what is required in the city parking lot.
Right, but the alternative example is they can provide 5, but they need 15.
Yeah.
That's when it would Trigger.
So they're only paying for what they can't meet. They're not paying.
Right.
You're saying it the way I'm thinking too, is,
Yeah, I agree.
yeah, okay.
Okay.
Because they're not paying for all 12, they're paying for one, because they've
So-
got 11, their structure, they meet the code with 11 spots, but they need 12, so then they fall into this.
Right.
And the
And that wouldn't
multiplier
even-
is,
That would just be a 1, because the
Yeah.
total number of spaces they need in the city lots is only 1.
And so they wouldn't trigger the multiplier because they only need 1.
So it'd only be if they were 10 or more short.
Yeah, in the city parking lots, or whatever that number is. It doesn't have to be 10.
Yeah, or in this case.
Yeah.
In this case. Okay, well, then it makes sense for the multiplier to be relatively high, because as you're saying, that's a relatively large.
Well, and almost no use in the historic district is gonna be that much anyway.
Right,
Yeah, I think it would be hard to have 10 additional spaces beyond what you already have.
that's
And-
why I asked that, it's what business is gonna come in and gonna need an extra 10.
might as well put the category there then.
If it does happen, then, clearly it would be a pretty big impact, I suppose.
And it would still have to be approved or disapproved specifically. Like, they wouldn't just get it because we made this.
Okay, so back to what do you want? How do you figure office space?
I had said 1 because it is probably not very many people, but you could have somebody visiting you too, so you could potentially have. I guess the same as a residential, like it's a smaller use for sure.
How do we do office space right now? Like if it's a change of business and you want to put a real estate office in there or something in, it's downtown, one of the storefronts, and they have 10 people, what right now would be the requirement for them for parking spots?
Well, an office space, like a bank or a professional office, dental clinic, it's just one space per 400 square feet of floor area.
Okay,
And so even if they had 10 employees, if they were only a 2,000 square foot space, they'd need 5 spaces,
Okay.
essentially.
so it's based on the square footage. Is that higher than a restaurant or
Yes.
retail?
So retail sales, like general commercial, general retail, wholesale, grocery stores. Well, not wholesale, but like general commercial, like any of the small retail is 1 per 300 square feet. So that one requires slightly more parking. Restaurants, I think, are 1 per 250 square feet. So that one has the highest requirement.
So I would say you follow along with those.
I'm comfortable with that. One other thing I was just thinking, I just want to mention, with this higher use, with the theater project, that could potentially. Maybe this could be different inside the historic district and out, because there is a.
Yeah.
Greater constriction in the historic district than there is outside still, even with the need for it outside.
That is a case where they have no parking and might require more than 10.
Yeah, potentially. So I'm just throwing that out there, that maybe that could be an unforeseen.
So have different multiplier for different sections of the city.
Well, because the historic district is the most constrained. And then maybe that is only in, I mean, that could be the thing we do, is put that just in the historic district and then everywhere else is just a 1-to-1.
So maybe it's if they go over a certain number of a need, it's a higher multiplier. whether it's, it doesn't matter where it's at, but then, like, if they're, say right now, they could do 5 spaces and they're building this to where they need 15 spaces. It's because they need more than 10. 10 seems like a high number when you say it that way, it's a higher multiplier.
It seems like if the multiplier is 1, there's no need to define that category at all, or is that correct?
I think you're right.
Just kind of other,
So it doesn't matter if it's 1 or 10 or 15.
no, I mean, excuse me, if the multiplier is just 1, then why even define the category? Just define it when you want a multiplier at all.
Unless you want to do something to reduce the requirement for like affordable housing or something.
Yeah, but then you had 0.25 there,
Yeah.
or something like that. That makes sense. And I do like that. That's a good idea. I have a question about a concern that was brought up last time we talked about this, which was city council's main concern, as I understood it, was to recapture that initial cost, whatever we define it as. And one of the concerns was if a business comes in, triggers a change of use, which triggers the parking fee of lieu, and then the business goes under relatively quickly and something else comes in, then they only paid for a couple of months and now the new person may or may not have to pay for it. But is that been addressed at all, or is that off topic? And
I
should wait till
don't-
later?
Know how to fix that.
Yeah, me
because
neither.
Once that change of use happens, it's done. And I think that it's
Seems like that was part of the discussion of the
There's-
monthly
yeah.
fee, but that has other issues.
what we could do, and we talked about this too, and I guess I didn't put this in my staff report. But we talked about tying it to the building owner and making it so that that's a because right now I think you can refund a portion of it. I believe, Nick.
Yes.
So you could if you tie it to the property and set it to the business, and then they're responsible for that. And the reason that might make sense too is because the property owner is essentially profiting off of that change of occupancy to the higher use. So because they never have to do it again, so they can lease that property out at a higher use. So it probably makes sense to tie this to the property in some ways as well, potentially.
Wouldn't you, though, if you're doing this parking multiplier, it's still paid on a monthly basis?
Yeah, we can still, and we
Yeah.
can do that now. That's why one of
So
the
if it
things,
changes, then it just goes away, what they paid, and then the next person that buys the property or puts the business in, it just starts all over for them.
but if the business goes out of business, like let's say that I decide I'm gonna start a new like meat facility or whatever. And then I'm like, I don't want this anymore. And I'm like, Uchi, why don't you make meat here now? Then she could just take over, potentially the way we have it set up now. I could close my business, but since that change of occupancy happened, she could come in and she has everything she needs to go. She doesn't have to like actually start paying anymore because it's not tied to the property, it's tied to the business. And once that change of occupancy occurs, they're covered up to that occupancy. So because it says in the code, like, as long as you don't exceed 25% of the previous use, you don't have to pay. Or you
It
don't
doesn't have to
do
be
that.
nefarious or anything.
Right.
That exact situation has happened pretty recently of a unoccupied space has been activated. The business either moved or just didn't work out or whatever, pretty quickly, like within a year. And then something else that's the same that didn't trigger a change of use came right in.
Yeah,
Like that's happened recently multiple times.
but if you put that on the
But wouldn't
property,
you
they
know
have to-
that?
we would, but we couldn't do anything about it because there's no trigger. Because because the way it's written now, you could get refunded for part of that. So then that's change of use still happened. So as long as it's not vacant for too long where there has to be another change of occupancy, but even then we would still look at this. As long as the parking requirement isn't more than 25%, then they don't have to actually provide, they wouldn't have to provide any parking that's under that 25%. So if you tied it to the property and you just said they have to pay back the whole thing no matter what, the property owner is the one who benefits from that because they can then lease out that space at that higher rent or whatever that you need for that higher use or however that would look. So if you tied it to the property owner, then they would have to be responsible for the whole payment or some portion thereof, maybe instead of having it be on the business. And then you would recover the whole, whatever you're looking to recover potentially.
That'd be a way to cover that case and still have it based on the total price recapture as opposed to the just monthly forever.
Mhm.
And it's a technical edge case, but I just bring it up because it's happened multiple times and council made it clear that their big priority was recapturing that cost.
Yeah, the other, I guess, I don't know how long your typical business stays in a single storefront, I guess. So if you had a 10-year payment or a 20-year payment, what's the likelihood, I guess, under the current system that, let's say, business will actually pay for 20 years? That would be the reason, I guess, also.
Yeah, and you don't
for
wanna, like,
property.
if you have an existing business that's part of the community, I guess that's the other side of this, is you don't want them to have to all of a sudden have. You know, if you're looking at overall impact, you don't want them to have to like suddenly pay some crazy amount of money for essentially the same impact, maybe.
But once we get this change, we're not gonna have that upfront payment. It's just gonna be monthly. So if it changes hands, at that point, you're still recouping the money as the person's there. So what you're saying is when the next person moves in, how do they now take over that payment? They have to come and reapply and do it just the same,
Not
or
if
they
they
don't
didn't
get
have
the
a change of
parking
use,
space.
not if they didn't have a change of use, they don't.
Yeah, because if it was like a change to retail or whatever, and it was like, they required 3 spaces, and my new business requires like less than 25 or 25, you know, like it's not a increase in that space, then I don't have to do anything, because the change of use already happened.
Don't they have
Because it
to
doesn't
come in
go
and get a
back.
business license?
Yeah, but they can get it, they wouldn't have to go through a change of occupancy, because it would be,
Right, 'cause the idea is that it's not like the business changed, but the use of
Right.
restaurant didn't change.
I think that it's a thing that seems like a technical edge case, but I would bet it's gonna come up more often than you think, well before any 20-year, well before 5 years a lot of the time. Especially as we're kind of activating new spaces, encouraging a lot of new business that some will not make it, or will just move or something.
If you, in the current system, if you, like if Boba Tea decided to move from their current location to a different place that used to be an office, could they take their fee in lieu with them? Or would they have to pay a new fee in lieu because they moved their existing business to a different place that triggered it?
I think that they would have to pay it again.
But it's more about their old space. If another
Right,
equivalent business came into that old space, now they've been there for 6 months, they paid 6 months, and now 19 and a half years goes unpaid.
I kind of think that that would be something we would want, well, if we could do that, that wouldn't be bad, because they've already paid their fee once, and they're already an existing, so we're measuring impact on total parking facilities, and their impact is a 0 then, really, because it's the same. And maybe that's how you do it, is you could put a multiplier for existing business moving to another business.
yeah, though I guess like it doesn't really make a huge difference, because if you no longer are paying at the old location because it was wiped out, then it doesn't matter if you're paying at the new location at the same rate.
It's like getting a new
You
mortgage.
just kind of, yeah, you just have it go a little longer.
How many of these are you gonna have if we change this to the monthly? Or are you gonna, how are we gonna change those?
I think that it's likely that we're going to encounter change of use at probably maybe 4 buildings in the next year and a half or so.
No, I mean, like, the ones that have done the pay in lieu.
Oh, I don't think they're all done. Everybody who,
I guess they're already either paying at a monthly rate because they've done an annualized payment, or they've just paid their.
Gem Motel
20,000.
maybe could come in and ask for that, but they've already been approved in the, under the old plan, so that would be like we'd have to like, and that was a condition of the FDP too. I don't know like what that would look
Yeah,
like.
I don't think you could. That's more like retroactive legislation where they have their vested property right in that.
No, what I'm thinking,
Recording.
is it fair to them? They paid all of it up front, and now if we go to a monthly thing.
They can pay it monthly now.
Okay.
This is one of the reasons why this exercise is a little bit interesting, is just because we already have that ability now. It's just set by Andy. When he makes an agreement, he has the ability to like say whether they can.
Monthly or the,
I think the difference, and I apologize for using the term monthly a little willy-nilly, but if I was providing the confusion, I apologize, I was trying to talk about the perpetual monthly fee versus the monthly payoff of a set amount.
You could do the flat fee up to. I mean,
It would essentially be what we do right now, right? It's
yeah,
just saying-
it's really the thing is nothing changes except for what you're trying to recover. No matter what we do, it's the same. It's just looking at the math slightly different, no matter what you do.
but if you go to the new way, it doesn't end.
Well, we would have an amount that, like, that multiplier would have. If the amount you wanna recover is 65,000.
Why not keep it forever?
Can you
I mean-
do a perpetual fee like that, like and just set it in the, like a business license kind of?
I think, isn't that the idea of the
You're renting it
second
for
option?
the
It
eternity
is,
of your
yeah.
business.
I mean, I see both, I see pros and cons to both personally.
Like a tax.
I mean, you look
Yeah,
at it
you'd
as
have to-
it's cost of doing business, you're renting those parking spots as long as you have your business.
Cause then you still have to have
I don't know,
access
it's
to
just
like what
throwing it
the
out
fee
there.
is set to
Yeah.
the cool taper.
That also addresses
Yeah, well-
the successive businesses.
I guess the question is, if it was 200 a month. It was $65,000 a spot. You'd be looking at,
26 years.
yeah, like so many years to pay it off that it essentially is perpetual.
That's what I mean, why stop at 26 years if you gotta, I mean, why are we?
Well, because, yeah, like then it becomes like tax world, but I'm thinking like if you're short 2 spots. And each spot's 65,000 and one spot's 26 years at 200 a month. It's like 52 years of payment. I mean, at that point, that
Oh, it
pretty
pretty
much
much
is,
concerned.
yeah, I mean, that's to the grave with you pretty much, so. Yeah,
Can you renegotiate, can we set that in the fee schedule, like, and modify it?
well, I think the fee,
Yeah, could we ratchet up their price every 5 years or something?
well, the fee would be tied to this price of the spot.
Yeah.
I think when that change of use happens.
So you wouldn't be able to renegotiate it over, but it could be renegotiated for future applications.
I think so,
Sometimes
yeah.
when you're leasing something too, they add, what is it, the consumer index? It comes out tomorrow
Yeah,
and that percentage is added on.
The-
We do our water storage like that.
but I don't think the price of constructing a parking spot is necessarily tied into the consumer index.
Just saying it's out there.
Yeah, I don't think that,
And not being able to renegotiate.
And sometimes your
would be
price
their
is higher and
bad,
less.
right?
It depends on what the
The mayor,
index is.
oh,
comes out
I think
tomorrow.
that there was some desire to have it like negotiated after a period, and I think the other question was, I guess, is O&M, like, how does that figure into it in the future, but I don't know if that's,
Like, once we've paid through everything we need to pay for in the program, our costs go down, so future applications could have a lower monthly fee.
I think so, cause then you're
But
talking about O&M costs instead
Current
of,
people would still be paying 200 a month until they finish, because that's part of the payment of the. So like, fees could go up, the parking space in 10 years could be $100,000, but we don't need more parking spaces. It could be
I think that's fair.
$100 a year of O&M.
Yeah, I guess you're right, cause it would, you at some point you recover that cost anyway, and then. I think that could work for the program if you guys are interested in that, something like that. It might be more simple to navigate for everyone potentially.
I think that was the original reason that we brought it up last time. And it's also, it's an easier way to bridge the successive businesses. But I seem to remember there being thoughts that it might be difficult from a legal perspective.
no, I think if it's tied to the spot of or the price of the spot. When the change of use is initiated. Which I don't know how dissimilar that is from what we have now. But I think that makes sense.
I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to come back and say, we actually think that what we have now is pretty good and only needs minor tweaking.
You could suggest council modify just the amount that they're collecting, since that was their concern.
Yeah.
Cause everything else is there, basically. And it would be great to have the loading space in the expansion, but
I was gonna say just regarding 0.3, basically.
Because we do also currently kind of have a use-based parking multiplier in that we would charge a lower amount for residential.
Yeah,
And so that's in there currently.
one thing you might consider, just to that point. In the gem, we didn't have a use that really specifically aligned to hotel, and we could put that language in with either with the hotel or restaurant and retail space charge, or you could put it, I don't know if you're gonna see a lot of hotels though, I guess,
So it would be the same,
yeah, you just put it there.
You're just
because it's
saying-
not addressed, is what you're saying.
Right, and we did some research when we looked at this, and it sounds like the impact from a hotel space is actually about the same as a restaurant and retail, because while there's less people, they stay there longer potentially, so you don't get the same turnover rate.
Okay, so it sounds like we've gone full circle.
So we like points 1 and 2. Are we thinking maybe just on point 3, multiplier is not needed and we could just,
Because it
What we
sounds
have
like it's
now.
where we're at, now that you guys have gone,
Do we wanna change the
Just a
duration
Yeah.
that this could last? Cause like right now, I think it's set to 10 years that you pay it back. So we could change duration so that it goes to that longer period, like you said,
Yeah,
and then you get a lower.
why
payment.
have it, do you
I mean, it's
really
hard.
have to have a period end date? I mean, it's the cost of doing business, is the way you look at it, and they chose to have that business that they didn't have enough parking. Or put it there, so, I mean,
I suppose the other question could be that if we said you only have to pay back 65,000, they could choose their period and say, let's make it 50 years.
well, you could say up to some amount that's reasonable.
I think the time period, shorter time period benefits the city
I agree,
because the time value of money for the business
Right.
owner,
right.
of course, is gonna take the longer time period to pay because
Always.
it decreases.
Take 99 years.
Yeah, I mean, it's like buying a car, but if the 84-month loan option is 0% interest and 12-month is 0% interest.
I guess that's why I'm saying, why even have an end date, that this is what the fee is per month, period.
That's a
If
different
you're-
discussion and that changes it pretty significantly is my thought. I mean, we could maybe do it, but I mean,
Well,
that changes things pretty significantly.
I guess I'm just thinking of that 200 mark, didn't we figure it out that one night, it was $168 or something like
It's
that?
270 over 20 years or 20,000.
270 over
Well,
20
it's never
years?
65,000.
Oh, 65,000. So yeah, you're right. It's 100, it's gotta be like.
I thought we were at like
No, you're right.
167
You're
or
right. I
something
was
like
thinking
that.
the wrong number.
If you're paying $20,000 divided by 140, well, 120 months, it would be 167. So
It'd be 83 if you did 20 years.
So,
at the 20,000.
so realistically, why not just come up with a number and that's what it costs? And your different business, the only difference is the residential. It doesn't matter if you're office, hotel, restaurant, retail, and you're paying, let's put it out there, 190 a month. And whatever the residential, and it's for as long as you have your business and there's no change in use.
If I understand right, is because we need to be tied to a number, right? We need to say, this is where it's coming from. We can just pull it out of thin air.
Okay, so put the years at where it comes out to about 190 a month. Because like you said, the idea of this is to recoup the cost for the city. You don't want one guy spreading it out over 30 years and then he's only paying $90 a month. And the next guy, because he's thinking, oh, I'm gonna be gone in 10 years. I only have to pay it for 10 years at $90 a month. Instead of at 190 a month.
So we can have like an equation where we have different, numbers where one is the how much it's gonna cost, right? The parking lot. Well, there's a number based. Where
Yeah.
it's $65,000. Yeah, that
Yeah,
one.
yeah.
And then we can add whatever number we think we need to add for like the loss in this business, the pay. I mean, I guess we can pull out whatever number, right? As long as we have an equation where it says this number comes from here.
Yeah. I think if the fee was forever, you would just at that point need to adjust it often to reflect the cost. So if the cost of the spot was 65,000 today, but next year it was 40,000, then I think the fee for the next year would go down.
Which,
Can we
that's
do
not,
that in the
that's
fee
okay.
schedule and just come up with a strategy we use, like to, like CPI or whatever we say, like whatever it is?
Well, I think you need to have studies, like
We have to know how much.
you would have to have like professional
Like an estimate of probable cost from like a.
computations, yeah.
You're talking the consumer index.
I was just saying, like, if we put in the ordinance, something that says this is how the fee is set.
Mhm.
And it's like, whatever, like we get our city engineer to give us a. Because we do that for a lot of project estimate of probable cost for like what we're expecting.
So
That
that
would
it's
be the-
self-executing the adjustments. over
Yeah, so
time.
like, it's set to like an index, like,
Yep.
like.
That's how we do storage, that's how we pay our annual fees for something we're leasing. And it's, the rate adjusts by the consumer index every year. And it's,
Yeah, but it's not the consumer index, it's the price of the spot.
But it's still pegged to an external thing.
it's
but
the
not
added
that.
cost to it, let's put it, we've got a flat fee and then the adjustment is made yearly on whatever that percentage is. Because we'll get the number tomorrow.
But if this year concrete's $100, I don't know
Mhm.
anything, but if it's $100 a pound, and next year it's $50 a pound, that's not a like linear rate that you can track. You would have to have a study done year over year.
You could build the expenses of that study into the fee. You could say the cost plus the cost to do the study, if
Okay,
you wanted, if you're worried about it.
If you take the 65,000, because you're wanting a fixed year and put it at 10 years, how much is that every year?
I mean, it would, and that's the downside of the simple parking fee, that it's not looking as simple all of a sudden. To me,
You can see a scenario where like we run out of, like, there's a shortage of concrete one year and this price could double.
or pandemic.
And then
And if you
people,
did 10 years, that's $541 a month, that's a lot.
What I like about the simple parking fee is that it solves the successive business issue kind of on its own, but it seems to introduce a lot of other issues
Could the
too.
frequency be less than or more than 1 year, or does it have to be annually, I think? Because we have to do our other fees annually, I know.
But I think annually would be the most comfortable, most likely, yeah.
So just to talk it out, like the logical conclusion, if that was what we would do, we would need to write into this ordinance, whatever the index we create that would measure that is and how we have to measure that. Like whether that means we get like the estimate of probable costs or like operation and maintenance or whatever's included, we'd have to have like some variable that we would use to determine what that number is.
Whatever I think it would just be a redo of however the spot price was determined. Like however you got the $65,000 originally.
Do we need something like that to determine what the spot price should be no matter what? Like, cause if that's a cost we're trying to recover even with the other thing, would it be better to have like that number more dialed in?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also just wonder if changing the language of the ordinance to just say citywide loading space, yes, and property owners, the applicant.
Yeah.
I wonder if that would just solve all of the problems that we've seen
You
here.
also push it to council like on the other one, if they really want to change it.
Yeah,
I think it would. Personally, I think
that's what I was, like, if we just made it so that the property owner and the documents recorded with the property, so that if you sell a property, it's a lien on the property. And increase the fee amounts ever so slightly, wouldn't that solve all of the problems?
it would for me, makes sense to me. But I'm glad we talked about it. It's a good discussion.
Thank you guys.
But I like it.
appreciate your time.
What do you all
on this
think
issue.
about that? What do y'all think about Nick's thing?
Like I said, we've just gone full
I
circle.
know, like my head's spinning thinking about the parking.
but that is a change because right now.
No, yeah.
It says business owner inside to be like, that's still a good recommendation change
Yeah.
to say now it's the property owner, so it took a long time, but.
And I think it addressed it can take a lot of work to get to a simple solution sometimes, like, that's okay. That doesn't mean we wasted our time.
Because that's what I'm hearing from you guys, is the fee needs to be
Yeah.
more captured.
Well,
and
that's
every
what
time
we heard from council, that was their direction to us.
Well, and every time we talked it, then you would go, yeah, you're right, that won't work. Yeah, no, we couldn't, so.
We've been, Dylan and I have spent a lot of time on this issue, just talking it through it, and it doesn't get simpler the longer you talk about it.
Yeah.
But I also like that this addresses your point, Dylan, is it keeps it from being too volatile for the business owner or the property.
Right.
Can we create a mechanism where the capture price could be changed without modifying the whole ordinance potentially? Like where there could be like a 5 years from now for future applications kind of deal, or?
Do you really think it's gonna go down in price?
No, I think it could go up. is
I
my
do
only-
too. I think it would go up.
I think it might be something that's worth this level of discussion and changing ordinance. I don't know.
Yeah, based on this conversation.
I mean, that's the thing.
Yeah, I mean, right now we have the number in the code. And it says the fee shall be adjusted from time to time by the city council by resolution. Oh, and shall be included on the city's annual fee schedule.
Oh,
So that would be good.
So could it currently be changed?
Yes, if city council passed a resolution, they could.
And would that change the written ordinance or would that just be?
No, the ordinance would be the same, but
Interesting.
since we say in it that it can be changed by resolution, if you had a resolution that was after the ordinance, the resolution would control.
But and so it could say one thing, but then be another.
we do need to.
I'm just curious. I'm
Yeah,
not
because it's
criticizing.
included on the city's
Yeah,
annual fee schedule.
Okay,
We do need to modify our fee schedule because it's not in there right now. But that's another thing council could do as a part of this process, is they could modify the fee schedule.
Well, and if you're modifying the fee schedule, could you just remove it from the number from the ordinance and say number is per fee schedule?
not until it's on the fee schedule.
Right, but I guess that could be a step that council takes is modifying the ordinance fee schedule concurrently to reflect that change in the it's cleaner
And
in
if
the
they're doing
future.
it every year, it's,
Yeah, it's just a recommendation when they do it.
because what tends to happen is 3 years down the road, everybody's gonna go, oh, shoot, we didn't look at, changing the ordinance yet for
Of
the
course, yeah.
price on it. So the way Dylan's saying it could work better. It's like,
You guys wrote a good ordinance the first time. It's pretty solid.
Sorry. So to get back to it, are we cool with Nick's suggestion of a simple yes on points 1 and 2, the citywide expansion and living space, but then man, are we just good on those first two?
yeah, I think
Okay.
just the way they came around that, and then keep researching the number 4, how you guys want
Yeah.
to do that, because it does sound like that's worth doing. And it will impact some future businesses that are trying to do stuff around here, which, you know,
And that
why
may
not be ahead of the game instead of trying to figure it out?
And that could be something we do that's separate from fee and lieu, you know, the shared parking stuff, so that would be a different ordinance, and we can just take that sort of once it's ready.
We've talked about reviewing those ordinances in general, all the parking stuff.
Sorry.
That could be like a plan for this year, maybe. Just go review and look a deep dive into it. We also, not to change topics any, but we've been talking about maybe a need to do just a read through of the ordinances and look at where some of the things we have noticed that there might be things that we want to look at potentially, and that could be the first step of a code review project potentially, so.
Sounds worth doing.
So was it a yes on property owner?
Yes.
I say yes.
Yeah.
Property, those, yeah,
So those two changes, property owner, and we're looking more at after hours.
the event and after hours.
Okay. That works.
Thank y'all.
Thank you.
These, I guess these for one year, so she doesn't have to run them out.
Parking spaces for.
Okay, is that it? Anything else you guys had?
So I think there'll be a few things coming, in February, so expect to be, the
Oh,
7th.
God, it's just letting us look this
And
up. Okay.
at that point, we might also have maybe a work session item on work planning for the rest of the year, kind of like your priorities, our priorities, kind of, you know, see where
Next
maybe we'd
event.
like to focus more on code amendments and other things, so.
So plan for a meeting the first week of February.
Yeah, and I think it's the 7th.
Yep.
Right.
I already put a notice in for one item, the C.1041 application for the Floyd Hill project, that we had a review on. Is that, so that'll be definitely coming as an action item.
It's a leap year. That's fun.
No pushing the first Wednesday too, because the second Wednesday is Valentine's Day. So this is it.
Hey,
February
you know,
7th.
it's fun.
You must be making plans.
Yeah, you got it. You gotta make your reservations in January, so you're set for February.
There's a wedding at Loveland.
On Valentine's Day, that's exciting.
A Wednesday wedding.
There always is on Valentine's Day. There's usually a
Yeah,
couple
it seems
hundred
like a
people.
mass once.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're gonna be freezing out there.
Oh, no, it's usually beautiful.
Oh, during the day they do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a mass wedding.
I've seen some nasty daytimes up by that pass though.
So it's the, should I stop the?
Yeah, you just end the meeting and
Oh, yeah.